welcome to another Life Solved short, where we talk with the University of Portsmouth researchers featured in this season's Life Solved podcast. I'm Robin Montague, and this time of year it's great to forget about the grey weather and curl up with a great movie. On-demand streaming has brought the latest flicks into our homes, with platforms competing to be the first to get the biggest hits out of the cinemas. So where does that leave our cinemas and the health of the movie industry now and going forwards? Joining me to discuss this further is Professor Lincoln Geraghty. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Robin.
So, Lincoln, your research interests have focused heavily on fandom and popular culture, which we've looked at actually previously in Life Solved. So this isn't the first time we've been discussing this.
Again.
I've got you again. So how does all of this connect with the big picture of film in our culture?
Well, films attract fans, and fandom, as you said, is one of my sort of research areas. Big film franchises last a long time because of fans, and fans take films very seriously. If you ever got into a heated debate around what trilogy is the best Star Wars trilogy down the pub at any point in time, and think some of the big film franchises which develop cultures of their own, like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, the Marvel MCU, of course, fans are attracted to these really massive franchises because of the sort of storylines and how those storylines spread across a number of years. Fans grow to love characters, particular characters in the MCU like Iron Man, or of course older characters we've seen in things like Star Wars, such as Han Solo, Luke Skywalker. They become quite iconic, and fans sort of grow up with them, and it becomes part of their daily sort of lived culture. It's not just big mainstream fan sort of films as well. If you think about cult movies like comedies, horrors, science fictions, films, they also attract what you might call a film culture because of the way people come together, often to watch them socially, either in cinemas, but maybe at special film festivals or exhibitions or secret cinema even that pops up around London or any town that you might have gone to see a secret cinema screening, where people come together and even maybe dress up, quote lines from the film, and just basically celebrate their love of that film.
And I think there you mentioned about, cult classics and then some of the bigger franchises. People do take them incredibly seriously, and these passions are really obvious. And why is that? Why do we almost take it as seriously as something like politics?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think because they mean something so personal to each individual viewer, fan, and that personality that you see in a film obviously sticks with you over time. So you hold on to these sort of beloved objects, and if they are threatened or you have to sort of defend them, as I said, down the pub with your mates, or even take them more seriously, like some academics do of film, then they become quite serious topics, allied to, as you said, politics, because often films do stray into politics, or they do stray into sort of culture, and they stand as important markers for our society, for our times. They sort of remind us of particular historical moments or movements. So these films often stand out as important sort of cultural markers or barometers for moments, both personally in our own lives, but maybe in the sort of history of the industry or history of sort of society.
And you mentioned there are a couple of genres as well that seem to sort of stand out. Superhero genre, comedies.
Yeah.
Going back in time then, when did we start to see these franchises emerging from these movies? Because I'm thinking of comedies, I just think of things like Carry On movies. Could you say that's a franchise?
Well, indeed, yeah. When we say franchise, we think, Star Wars, MCU, recent big movie franchises. But absolutely, the history of the franchise goes back to the history of birth of cinema itself. Certainly, in a British context, the Carry On films are a very popular and famous franchise that sort of launched a number of famous actors or famous names that sort of stuck with us in our own sort of cultural memory. They last several decades and had, of course, a lot of spin-offs. Going back further, you can see a history of sort of franchises to the sort of birth of cinema, sort of the early 1910s. It's silent movies as a way of getting people to regularly come out to the cinema. Serials or serial film, I'm thinking The Perils of Pauline, if you've ever heard that, was a way of getting people regularly to come to the cinema, often using the idea of cliffhangers to get people coming back. Now, you could argue that is more of a sort of soap operatic format. It's about continuing the story through a series of sort of parts. But it was, you could argue, a proto early franchise because it had merchandise. It sold things that people could buy outside the cinema. You could buy Perils of Pauline sheet music and listen to the soundtrack at home. So, so you could argue these are sort of early examples of the franchise.
And what you said there as well, a franchise, when you think of it being like a continuation of a story or of a world. But actually, it's not just that. It can just be a theme of characters or a personality. Because I'm thinking of like Charlie Chaplin movies. All the stories are different. However, he makes it a franchise because of his personality.
Absolutely, and this is where you also get ideas of the brand being important to a franchise. So you mentioned Chaplin; he was a brand in himself, an icon, and people flocked to see his movies because of him, regardless of the story, because you knew what you were going to get with him and his sort of little tramp character. And similarly with the Bond franchise, with the sort of particular look, regardless of the actor playing Bond, whether it be Pierce Brosnan, Roger Moore, my personal favorite, Sean Connery. You have the iconic Bond character standing out over time, and I guess this is why it's so heated and debated more lately. Is does that character change along with the times? If he does too much, then of course people might not go and see the next movie because it's not the same as it was before. So often franchises do lie in the sort of importance of the single character, regardless of the storyline or whether it continues or whether it's a sequel, a prequel, a sidequel, or any sort of quel that there is out there.
I'm a Sean Connery fan.
Well, no,
So-
no, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. It's just, I guess I grew up a bit like favorite Doctor or favorite whatever. Roger Moore was out in the cinema when I was able to go to the cinema and saw most of his movies. And interestingly, again, it did cross over with some of my own loves of cinema, science fiction, films like Moonraker, where clearly the franchise was being influenced by another franchise, Star Wars. Let's set Bond in space, just like Star Wars is set in space.
So we've just jumped straight into the franchise chat, and I've still got loads of questions, so I am
Mm.
going to go back to that. But just to start again from the fandom point of view, because your research focuses heavily on fandom. For anyone who doesn't know, what does fandom actually mean?
Well, again, in different areas, if you think of fans, football fans, that sort of idea comes quite quickly to mind. People that sort of love or follow a thing, a team, a music group, or indeed a film or TV show quite loyally, quite seriously. But put it simply, I'm interested in the community aspect of fandom. Fandom is about bringing people together around a shared love of a particular media text or a media personality, a celebrity, or indeed, as I said, a football team or any other sort of popular culture entity that sort of people see themselves in, but also see themselves sharing those likes with other people. So the community aspect is one that I find quite fascinating in my research. Again, personally, through my own sort of growing up as loving something beyond than just simply watching it. So learning about characters in Star Wars, for example, takes me into sort of reading about them. When I do research, I find out that, people have written these stories, and then I look to see who else is writing these stories, and you start to sort of find out that there's other people that like this stuff. That's why they're so popular. And a lot of the sort of reasons why people become fans is the social aspect of things. It's about bringing people together. And once you sort of recognize that you like a film, then you start to learn to sort of, love and appreciate the community for what it is.
And where does you're clearly very passionate about
Mm.
TV and film.
Mm.
Where did this all stem from? What was the first moment that you thought, wow, I really love this?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Yeah, when you always think back to your childhood, what starts what? So, memories of a Chewbacca birthday cake at one point. So, I must have liked Star Wars. And I have memories of watching things like Empire Strikes Back in the early 80s, really loving, of course, the character, the space battles, all that sort of thing. And then, and as franchises do this quite well, they sell toys and products that as a kid I'm obviously quite drawn to playing with them. Um, but that love sort of forms into a long lasting relationship. So when the thing is not on TV or film screens, you just don't forget about it because the sort of world has drawn you in. So then you read the novels, you read the comic books, and then if a game comes out, you play the video game. And that sort of keeps you in the world. And so that fandom becomes a sort of much more long-lived experience. It's not just one-off.
And what you mentioned there about how clever they are at getting you to continually engage, even when maybe the films aren't playing or they've kind of come to an end.
Mm.
It seems to be that the appetite for these franchises have always been there, from what you've been saying.
Mm.
Why is it changing now? What has happened to sort of behaviours in society that has made us kind of not necessarily crave them more, but we're getting them more? Because it seems to be a never-ending stream of franchises at the
Yeah.
moment.
Well, I guess it's Hollywood's found a model that works. As I said, it's a model they've developed and brought out time and time again, right from the beginning of early cinema. Often, and particularly thinking about blockbuster franchises, those franchises that target particular seasons in the year, where they release a movie in summer holidays or at Christmas time, when they know people are more likely to go out and see them. That strategy has been around in Hollywood, again, since the 60s and 70s, really, as a way of getting people back into theatres. People were actually distracted. TV was a relatively new medium back in the 60s, and it was a competition for Hollywood cinema. So the sort of birth of the blockbuster or the event movie in that period got Hollywood thinking. If you can draw people in once for a big movie like Star Wars, then the potential for a sequel or a third film in what you might call a franchise is that sort of regular guaranteed income every 2 or 3 years. So Hollywood as a sort of industry, with studios being part of that industry, start to plan, well, if we have a hit, how do we follow it up? How do we keep people coming back for another segment of that story, of that film? And then alongside of it, again, many people credit George Lucas for this, what can we get people buying or collecting outside of the film? So toys, merch, and that becomes the sort of big strategy alongside the actual movie itself, is to have people or give people something they could keep as memory, something they could play with literally when the film's not there. That keeps people engaged. So when a new one comes out, they're even more ready for it, and they're desperate for the sequel or the threequel.
And are there any particular genres that seem to do better than others when it comes to these franchises? Because I'm just thinking of like Marvel. They have. How are we all still watching the Marvel movies and still engaged? I mean, I don't want to. This is a spoiler, guys, if you haven't seen it, but when Iron Man died, I was in tears.
Get over it. Yeah, well, that's it. No, indeed, and I think that's part of the beauty of franchises in the very simple way, is they're able to sort of tell a large and immersive story across multiple platforms. So film at the center. So like, as you mentioned, Endgame and the whole sort of Infinity War saga. But that also spawns what you might call paratext, sort of TV series alongside, short films on the web, the merchandise, as I said. So that keeps people sort of engaged with the story beyond just the movie. So it adds to that longevity. And that sort of story is just so big. It can't be contained in one film. So to tell the real story of Thanos' eventual demise, you have to chart that over 10, 15 movies. And then it becomes, as we know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's chopped up in phases, and fans, will know what phase leads into the other, and the whole sort of sequential story. To really understand it and get it, you have to watch all those films in some sort of order.
Well, thank you so much, Lincoln. It was an absolute pleasure having you on again.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll get you on again in the future.
It's a franchise.
It's a franchise, exactly.
What's the sequel?
If you'd like to hear the full interview, listen to the Life Solved podcast on the University of Portsmouth website, or just search for Life Solved on your favourite podcast app now. You can also click the link in the comments box below, or head to port.ac.uk/research. See you again next time.